So I want to share the story of Lilith and Eve with everyone because I think it's a great story that reflects our own culture today, our identity, and where we might have fracturings in our wholeness or authenticity. So just to begin, in Genesis, God or Jehovah, who isn't necessarily actual God, I'm talking about the Judeo God, who in my opinion is not the Father. Okay, so this is Yahweh. But 2/3 of the world believe in this figure as God, and we live in a patriarchal world, and we'll see why soon enough. So the first creation story in Genesis, there's actually two creation stories. The first one is God creates man and woman at the same time. The second one, and some people don't know there's two. The second one, God creates Eve out of Adam. So she is subordinate to him. So there's actually two versions there. So put that on ice, okay? Now let's go to the story of Lilith. And we have a lot of writing about Lilith in old Jewish texts from, I think, like the 9th century, around there. And there's many texts about her, so I'm just going to kind of give you this in summary. And she comes up, though, before these texts, she comes up in ancient Sumeria, Lilith as a character. So it's not the first time she appears, okay? But from the Jewish perspective, the first woman God creates is Lilith. And he creates Lilith at the same time as Adam, right? And he creates Lilith from dust and filth, okay? And so they're created at the same moment. And when it comes time to copulate, Adam wants Lilith to lie down. He wants to be on top of her. He wants her to subordinate herself to him, okay? But she refuses. She says, no, Adam, I don't want to do that. We were created equal. We must be eye to eye. Why must I subordinate myself? Adam won't accept this, and he attempts to actually take her by force. So there is an attempted rape. And Lilith flies away. She leaves the garden and disappears. And she ends up in another place where she copulates with Samuel, a demon, right? And she ends up apparently having 1,000 demon babies each day, and she's having a lot of sex, right? In this other place she's disappeared to. Then Adam complains to Jehovah, Yahweh, the patriarchal, rabbinical Jewish God who is a psychopath, and says, oh, Lilith left. She wouldn't bow down to me. She wouldn't subordinate herself to me, and she left. So Jehovah sends 3 angels to go and retrieve Lilith. And they say to her, you have to come back. And Lilith says, I don't want to go back because he said I had to subordinate myself, but we were made equal at the same time. I'm equal to him. And they say, it doesn't matter, you must come back. Okay, so this is Jehovah. Return to your rapist, please. Lilith says, no, I won't. And they say, well, if you don't, we're going to drown you. And Lilith says, you can't drown me because I'm the guardian of children up until the age 8. Okay, so they say, okay, fine, we won't drown you. So they leave Lilith be, and in Jewish sort of texts, they then become very concerned about her, and they make amulets to protect themselves from her because they say she murders children and she's a seductress and these kinds of things, okay? So that's where Lilith ends up. They go back to God and they tell him, and Adam's complaining because he's a mollycoddled boy, right? So somebody brought this up in my group tonight. They said it's interesting about Adam because there's no mother as the primary creatrix, the primary creator, which comes up in all other indigenous creation stories. This is standalone in that a genocidal, patriarchal character Jehovah creates. From what, Jehovah? Do you have a womb? I don't see one. So Adam doesn't have a mother, and thus Adam is orphaned. He doesn't know how to treat women. He doesn't know how to respect nature and the feminine, right? So let's just also frame Adam. And he's an eternal mollycoddled boy. And he says to Jehovah, no, this isn't fair. I want a counterpart. So then Jehovah creates the first Eve. This comes up in some texts. And she's beautiful, and when Adam looks at her, he can't copulate with her because he saw God, Jehovah, creating her, and he's kind of disgusted by the whole process. He didn't like the blood, the clay, the muscles, the sinews, the bones. He has a problem with watching childbirth. Okay, he thinks nature is disgusting. So I'm getting a little snippy here because I love nature. And so God says, oh, okay, Adam. So nobody knows what happens to the first Eve. Adam goes to sleep, and then Jehovah creates another Eve for him. And he wakes up, and because he didn't see the creation process happen, he's very delighted, and now he has his subordinate woman, Eve. And the story is that Eve comes after Adam, comes from Adam, and she is submissive to Adam. So if you're familiar with Old Testament and New Testament theology, the feminine or the female is placed underneath the male. Her eyes are lower than Adam's eyes. So the man leads in the home. The woman doesn't preach. The woman doesn't lead. The woman is a subordinated, polite, domestic, nice, pretty, silent, don't argue, quiet, perfect Eve. Okay, so this is the first patriarchal construct we see in society today. Women that feel, and it's a trauma, right? We've grown up in a dysfunctional patriarchal society. So women have been conditioned to obey. Whether you grew up in a religion, an Abrahamic religion or not, this is prevalent in society, right? In different cultural systems. Women keep silent and they must obey, and they must keep defending inappropriate, narcissistic or covert narcissistic behavior. They always make excuses for the male counterpart when he's being inappropriate, because Jehovah didn't even have anything to say about the fact that Adam tried and attempted to rape Lilith. He told Lilith to go back to her rapist. Okay, so that's the first construct we see, not just in women but also in men. Very obedient. Then the second construct we see is Lilith. Now, Lilith, in terms of this story, has been exiled from the garden by somebody who tried to rape her, and this false father god didn't even defend her. So now she has been traumatized, and she lives in a space where she's having a lot of sex and giving birth to demon babies. And I know for my own self, in my own life, when I wasn't acknowledged eye to eye by the men in my life, my father figure, all the men in my life, they kept forcing me or shaming me and guilting me into subordination. That creates such a fracturing that I flew away from myself. We fly away. We break inside. It's a trauma. It's a subconscious conditioning and trauma. And we start to act out. So the acting out, it comes from the sacral area, which is an insatiable need to be accepted and loved, of course, because we were never accepted eye to eye. So when we are not accepted eye to eye by the people in our lives, not just men, but also women, because women have become sort of Jehovah in their minds. So they also don't accept, and they also force us to subordinate, and they also manipulate. So in that scenario, Lilith has been exiled from the garden, and she's now operating out of her wounds. She's over-sensualized. She is over-sensualized, and that can look like, too much of the sensuality, which can also be too much compulsion or addiction. So it can play out in many ways. And this is why I say that the patriarchal feminine is either pretty polite and nice or over-sensualized. And they think that sex and sensuality is the primary function of the feminine, right? And not that sex and sensuality are wrong. Those are beautiful things. But see this tree behind me? It's one fruit. It's one of the fruits. But if it's the primary fruit that's always coming forth, this spirituality thirst trap, right? Always having to be overly, it's all about the sex. That's also problematic. That isn't a liberated feminine, although those feminines like to tell themselves that that means they're liberated. It doesn't mean you're liberated, because it's an exiled state of being, and it's a ruptured sacral. Okay, so sex belongs with all the other fruits. sensuality. It can't be the primary thing. Just like polite, pretty, and nice can't be the primary thing, right? There's a fullness to her. So there's this exile and this fracturing I see in goddess culture in men and in women, right? Even though this is about the feminine is part of all of us. Okay, so, you know, what I'm going to be doing with my fellowships is that we're going to be looking at other creation myths, because the original creation myth of the Gnostics and the early Christians were mother-based, Sophia-based, just like African cosmology and indigenous Native American cosmology is things come forth, the first being is Ma, or the primordial womb, and things come forth from the womb of being. And the origin story is connected to the womb of earth and the mother and nature. And so there is a respect for the feminine, and there's a wholeness there. So just because I'm telling you the story doesn't mean it's the truth. It's the story that belongs to the patriarchal, rabbinical Jewish culture, which has now infiltrated the entire earth through Judeo-Christianity, Judaism, and through Islam. There is a constraint on the feminine, and it fractures the identity into polite or over-sensualized. But if we look to our indigenous wisdom and our indigenous creation myths, those are much more empowering and wholesome, because Lilith shouldn't be in exile. Lilith should be in the garden. She is the garden. She used to be, before these patriarchal religions, she used to be associated with Ishtar and the tree. So she's very much connected to Asherah and the tree mother. She is the garden itself, her nature itself. So when we come deeper into our own wholeness and authenticity, what I've noticed in my own life is that there is a blossoming of many colors and flowers to me. I don't play in one note that pleases people. I don't subordinate myself to people. I don't allow people to manipulate me. I don't use my sexuality continuously to get attention, right? To get love, to get eyes on me, because I wasn't given equal eyes. So Lilith in her power is not in exile, having 100 demon babies every day. She's back in the Garden of Eden. And in fact, Adam's not even there, because that is a psychopathic story that belongs to a culture that has taken control of the entire earth. And just to mention here as well, not only do Zionist, Talmudic, Kabbalist Jews basically run the deep state and create wars for money because they hate nature. They exiled Lilith. They hate nature. They will keep exploiting nature and bodies and animals and people. So they do that. And they own and run over-sexualized culture. The main owners of the porn industry are Zionist Talmudic Jews. The main owner, 96% of entertainment is owned by Zionist Talmudic Jews. So it's interesting to see that the people with this very patriarchal, broken creation myth run both sides of the line. They run the over-sensualized superstars that they own and use, like Beyonce, Miley Cyrus, Kardashian. If your spirituality looks anything like those celebrities, it's problematic, because those celebrities are owned by the same people genociding the peoples of the earth. Right? So they perpetuate both of these pathologies. In their orthodoxy, the women are constrained and they can't, they're not allowed to teach or preach, and they have to serve and be the domesticated Eve that's subordinated. And when women don't want to do that and they belong to another culture, they use the entertainment industry to exile her sensuality into another space. So neither of those spaces is wholesome or authentic, truly authentic. And it's okay. It's okay. I've gone through this myself, and I'm also always kind of looking at it myself. We've all grown up in this very patriarchal place of fracturing of the self and this exploitation of nature, not just the body of nature around us, the earth around us and the animals around us, but that exploitation now happens to our own bodies and psyche. So I hope this story helps you to reclaim your fullness, your wholeness, your Eden, and not to live in these constructs, but to be the fullness of you and your authenticity.